surprised it's actually I'm not surprised. Really good. Thank you to my friend who gave me this a long time ago. But I mean, sugar can't really go bad. I mean, I don't think it can. Just pop one and you're good. All right. We're close to the end here. We are close to the end. So let's get closer to the end. Instead, we late moderns switch listlessly between substitutes, reason, liberty, utility, and so on, unable to secure a consensus, or even worse, pay lip service to institutional mission statements that are so vapid and gestural in their construction, that they do not stand up to inspection. Um, The restless condition Nitz argues constitutes our nihilism. A nihilist, as he puts it, is one who judges the world as it is that it ought not to be. Judges of the world as it is that it is. Judges of the world as it is that it ought not to be. See, that's not cool. That's not a cool sentence. And of the world as it ought to be that it does not exist. Nihilism in this context describes a form of dissatisfaction that we will struggle to escape. It is the condition of those who complain but lack the mean to remedy their situation. Me. For real though. It is a culturally produced disorder that afflicts the most hopeful idealist. Dang. Just as it conditions the most dejected cynic. Indeed, it connects one to the other. Here, perhaps, niche critique for nihilism affords one of the most useful explanatory frameworks for understanding contemporary cynicism as a necessary cultural phenomenon. One that has been in gestation since the advent of Western subjectivity. As such, it can be appreciated and understood as a conflicted, melancholic state that will not accommodate itself to or even acknowledge the consequences of the death of God, or a shift to modern forms of legitimation. That have given up a cosmic sense of reason, a sense of our place within an order of existence that exceeds us. To quote Nietzsche once more, this tremendous event is still on its way. It has not yet reached the ears of men. I have not yet realized the full extent of ontological convulsion that was brought about by a switch to modern understanding of our place within the universe. Modern cynicism is what reigns in the dubious integrum. It is the product of a failure to come to terms with loss, a failure to realize that something has been lost. Or, if the loss is acknowledged, a failure to understand precisely what it was lost in the lost object. It can be understood by the condition of arrested mourning, a melancholic state, to invoke Freud, understood as a failure to mourn successfully, where to properly mourn a lost object, one must confront the trauma of its loss. Melancholia keeps the cynic trapped. It is this arrested suffering state, the existence of the lost object is psychically prolonged, I don't know, though its presence is not easily detected. It is prolonged as a disavowed attachment to things that the cynic claims to no longer believe. This melancholic condition endures with such force that is so difficult to combat, because it is impossible to fully reconcile oneself to a loss that can only vaguely comprehend. Suffering in this manner, modern cynicism remains stuck with an abstract but utterly debilitating sense of disappointment. Mm-mm. The root cause of which it cannot identify or move beyond. This condition of disappointment is nonetheless something one might work with, come to understand and seek to develop, so as to help cynicism escape its melancholic entrapment and confront the underpinning trauma to which it is as yet an inadequate response. I'd like to know that I think we're one in the same. Shoot. Just doing a quick pit stop here. Oh, Jesus Christ, bruh. It's not fair. How in the world do you even. Yeah, why not? Why not? Why not? Let's just do this. Why not? Like cynicism as a descriptive term, nihilism is used mainly in the prerogative sense. Indeed, both have been lumped together. Akin to nihilism, cynicism leads individuals and nations to abandon all moral values and drown in a fatigued sea of intellectual and ethical moroseness. Like cynicism, nihilism requires a degree of rehabilitation as a concept before it can be meaningfully confronted. Typically, it is associated with the belief that life is meaningless and nothing is true. As such, nihilism is figured as a dangerous affliction, erosive of the social order, gratifying nothing but its own diminished outlook. But this depiction of nihilism is too absolute and dismissive, reducing a highly complex crisis in legitimation to an irrational condition of determined negativity. Conceptions, conceptions such as these must be cleared away in order to reach a better understanding of how nihilism manifests in everyday behavior. Nihilism is not entirely mired in or constituted by negativity. To take the example of education, almost nobody working within educational setting is a nihilist in the colloquial sense, since this would mean giving up entirely on the idea that education serves a purpose of some sort, whether moral or liberatory, or even just instrumental and pragmatic. To function in an educational environment, it is necessary to retain some semblance of belief that education, however, that idea is configured. Though educational institutions are places that nurture various forms of negativity, ranging from the systematic production of failing students to compliance slung back and forth between staff, students, administrators, and managers who exist uneasily alongside one another in an environment where the ultimate purpose and organizing principles of education remain unclear. All such lamentations are based on the prior condition that they do not disturb the idea of education is both important and necessary. Negativity runs amok in such places, but it is not absolute, nor is it catastrophic to the idea of education. Negative sentiments can be indulged without threatening the underpinning commitment of educational spaces to the idea that they can always be improved by being rendered more educational. Hmm. Every complaint against education only defers the problem of education, where more better education is the only conceivable solution to each failure of the education to deliver. Modern education is nihilistic, then thought not in the conventional sense of giving up because nothing matters. Its, its nihilism resides in the demand that education must be redeemed. Though by design it never can or will be. To quote Nitz, those who suffer education in its current forms are sustained by a hope which cannot be refuted by any actuality, which is not done away with by any fulfillment to hope and beyond. For education, this beyond takes many forms, an educational promise of fulfillment, enlightenment, and justice that are maintained, assumed and reassured but never realized. This is its nihilism. It is also the cause of cynicism, which appears in consequence of the educator's fat, indefatigable attempts to redeem education, attempts that must fail again and again. The failing student, produced by a system that requires failure in order to conceptualize success, provides endless resources for cynicism of an unproductive, closed, and unreflective form. The cynicism takes root in the very educator or practical idealist who produced it by way of their uncynical commitment to the betterment of the way of education. Education retreats from the more complete realization of its nihilism, from recognizing the nihilism of its educational optimism, though it may be better served if it embraced it. It has been argued, indeed, that the advent of Western nihilism is not to be regretted. While suffering it, so the argument goes, we might gain access to the process of becoming of the false constructs of metaphysics, morality, religion, and art. When embraced, nihilism brings into view the entire tissue of erring that alone constitutes the wealth, or more simply put, the essence of reality. This is hardly consoling, but why must it be? Perhaps here the closely associated attitude of modern cynicism might be of some assistance, reducing our need of and desire for redemption. More deliberate cynicism might cause us to falter in our habitual retreat, the hoped for security of revived metaphysical frameworks and authentic political engagements. It might help to resist the false promise of hope, the reassurance that we might overcome our nihilism by force of will, as if it could simply be rejected. The modern cynic would achieve all this by way of mode of critique that is just as damning for the cynic as it is for anyone else. This is what Nietzsche admired in the so-called cynics of his day, namely people who recognize the animal, the baseness, the rule itself, and yet still have that degree of intelligence and gumption that forces them to talk about themselves and people like they are in front of witnesses. Occasionally, he adds, they even wallow in books as in their own dirt, demonstrating that this much fetishized medium offers no escape. Why not? Do another pit stop for today. For tate. Mm-mm. Mm, show. Show. Yeah. Mm, mm. Yeah, yeah. Show. I'm just. All right, that's enough. Oh, wait, didn't I? Hmm. Take me in my element. Ah, take me in my element. I mean, that's a cool one. Okay. Ooh, yeah, yeah, no. Sure. Okay, let's put this down now. Okay. Sodrick and the Code of Shitting. Sodrick famously introduces his critique of modern cynical reason by declaring that near death of philosophy. For a century now, philosophy has been lying on its deathbed. We are enlightened, we are apathetic, no one wants to talk about no one wants to talk anymore of love, of wisdom. There is no longer any knowledge whose friend one could be. Where philosophy has not foundered on the mere administration of thought, it plods on its in glittering agony, haunted by the great themes and hopes it never realized. Sodrick's outlook for education is similarly bleak, perhaps more so, given that he detects in the air the end of the belief in education. No less, perhaps, Sodrick can smell better than most, but I do not sense it. He writes of a glowing realization that was a certainty in ancient cynicism, namely the idea that things must first be better before you can learn anything sensible. This idea would indeed sound the knell of education as we know it, though the opposite remains the case, namely the dominant perception of learning, that learning must prefigure or drive improvement. Since Sodrick offered his diagnosis, governments have insisted on the point. Learning is no longer optional. All members of society must embrace the path of a lifelong learning as if that were the route to general economic prosperity. Though Sodrick may be right insofar as it talks of love of wisdom and the preeminent importance of the educated, how smacks of credibility, he perhaps overstates the case. Philosophers and educators still labor away, believing only if dimly that what they do is orientated to improvement and betterment. Modern cynicism is driven by the generalized apathy, but by incomplete disenchantment. Another example of overstatement in Sodrik's analysis is the claim, because everything has become problematic, everything is now a matter of indifference. But modern cynics are not entirely indifferent, I would argue. They are characterized more often by a hollow cheerfulness than an abject gloom. By comparison, Sodrik's description of present day cynics are borderline melancholics is more instructive, though Sodrik gives too much credit to those who he claims maintain their existence at the border of melancholia. Without falling into a full blown melancholic stupor, Sodrik suggests that present day cynics survive only to the extent that they can keep their symptoms of depression under control. Another interpretation of this melancholic coordination condition. To continue the argument presented above, would he be to say that present day cynics are borderline melancholics because they have not yet entirely submitted themselves to cynicism, just as those who suffer most from the effects of nihilism, in its sense, have not yet come to terms with the predicament. They remain more or less able to work, not because they are otherwise raging and oh my god, not because they keep an otherwise raging cynicism under control, but because it has not yet made its presence fully yet. Elsewhere, Sodrich describes modern cynicism as a form of nausea. The cynic feels nauseated in principle. For him, everything is shit. His over disappointed superego does not see the good in the shit. This exaggerates the ferocity of modern cynicism. Once again, the problem with modern cynics, I would argue, is that they are not yet disappointed enough. This is how modern cynicism endures as a cultural phenomenon, avoiding ever reaching a point of crisis at which it might be confronted. Overstated, though, Sodrik's description of the modern cynic may be it establishes a useful point of distinction with ancient cynicism, where cynic philosophers are those who do not get nauseated. Sodrich suggests that ancient cynics were like young children in this respect, who do not yet know anything about the negativity of their excrement. Here, it might be worth giving ancient cynics more credit. Cynic engagement with excrement can be understood as a tactical rather than an infantile, using the filth they produce to make a point. The scatological behavior of the ancient cynic carries the message. How funny it is that you find this so upsetting. For the self-consciously modern cynic, by contrast, the cynic who is determined to rise to the severe cynicism that Sodrich imagines, the lesson is transformed. We are not yet nauseated enough. The lesson begins by addressing anyone who is prepared to hear, that is to say, anyone with a nescient ecological consciousness, conveying what they already know. Though the cynic puts things more harshly than most, humankind must face what it has become, a hyperproductive shit accumulating industry animal, as Sodrich puts it with characteristic bluntness, to point with uncomfortable insistence to the colossal production of waste is not the end of the matter. However, since waste production is tied into waste management, even nausea can be co-opted. There is perhaps no better study of our ambivalent relation to waste than Dominique Laporte's much neglected history of shit. The rejection of waste is foundational to the production of order. Laporte argues enforcing a code of shitting, the master code, it will not suffice to point out the existence of all the shit we produce, so as to become better nauseated before the squalor. If that complaint is ever heard, it will lead to redoubled attempts to secure order, to redoubled industry, with the inevitable production of more shit as the problem of waste is again adopted by capital. Hence, the cynic of this more brazen scatological informed persuasion is not overcome by indignation that slides into a more morose sentiment at the sight of seas of plastic in a collapsing biosphere. The cynic does not point and stare and insist that something have to be done. Having long become familiar with the mutual circulation of shit and power, this cynic perceives the extent of that problem. Satisfied with nothing less than the annihilation of what we are, this cynic is not diverted in his or her radicalism by fond and sentimental illusions. This cynic occupies a position that suspects all action within the present order of existence to be, at best, a distraction, and at worst, by means by which we accommodate ourselves to the status quo of global expectation and degradation. Right on the dot. And with that, I think we're on our last chapter here, chapter 8, with only about 13 pages left. Yeah. We've reached the coda. I'm sure coda is something that I'm sure we've learned about. But I don't remember. All right. I'm going to go now. Bye-bye.